Today we're installing the SafeLogic Xtreme from SecureM Systems on this Liberty Safe. Christine's going to be helping me with the installation. Now, why would we install a SafeLogic Xtreme? The Xtreme offers a redundant solution for safe lock opening. It provides you a push-button code to enter the code electronically and open the safe. Or, if there's an issue with the electronics, you can always dial the safe open using a mechanical combination. Now, the SafeLogic Xtreme is a truly EMP-proof safe lock. In the event of an EMP attack, this lock would be able to be dialed open mechanically. No electronic lock on its own is an EMP-proof lock. The first step in the installation process is to remove the existing lock you have on your safe. Before you remove the lock, you'll want to open the safe, and the safe should remain open during the entire installation process as well as the programming process. Now that the existing keypad's removed, we're going to move to the inside of the safe and uninstall the lock body. With the interior panel removed from the back of the safe door, we can see the lock body. It's a good idea to take a picture of the assembly prior to removing any components. This will help you to ensure that the relocker plate is in proper position when you finish your installation. You'll notice the lock assembly includes the lock body, a relocker plate, and a relocker pin. This pin is designed to prevent against forced entry through a punch attack from the outside of the safe. So if the lock body were to be forcibly removed from the front of the safe, then this relocker pin would fire as it's spring-loaded, and it would prevent the safe door from being able to be opened. So it's important to take a photograph of this so that you know the position of the relocker pin. In order to begin the removal of the existing lock body, the first thing we want to do is secure the relocker pin. So lift that up and set it aside so that it doesn't fire. You may want to use a set of vice grips to hold this pin in place. Now we'll remove the relocker plate. There are two screws that hold this relocker plate on. We're going to remove both of those screws. Perfect. And set those aside. The next step is to disconnect the lock cable from the lock body. Now we can remove the three mounting screws. Perfect. Remove the lock cable from the spindle hole, and we're ready to begin the installation of the SafeLogic Xtreme. In the SafeLogic Xtreme kit, you'll find a number of components. First, the keypad and dial ring. Next, the lock body, the spindle, a protective tube, and then an accessory packet that contains the lock mounting screws, the dial ring mounting screws, and the change key. In order to measure the spindle, we want to calculate the door thickness. One way to do this is to insert the spindle through the hole, make sure that it's flush on the outside with the outside of the safe. Now from the inside of the door, mark the location where the spindle meets the mounting plate. That'll effectively provide us with the door thickness. Now remove the spindle. With the spindle marked for door thickness, we now need to add 1.75 inches to this mark in order to determine the correct length of the spindle to go through the lock body. It's important to note that we marked the spindle from the drilled and tapped end. With the ruler beside the spindle, we're now going to add on 1.75 inches to the mark that we created for the door thickness. This mark is the correct mark for the spindle length, and we'll cut the spindle at that mark. With the spindle cut for the correct length, we now need to cut the protective tube that's also found in your package. So lie the protective tube beside the pre-marked spindle. You want to mark the protective tube at this mark from the drilled and tapped end. Now go ahead and cut the tube at that mark. Perfect. We're ready to do our installation. The first step in our installation is to install the dial ring. On the back of the dial ring, you'll see that the lock cable is wound around the hub. You'll want to straighten that out and see if you can take the curl out of it in order to pass it through the spindle hole. Now we'll insert the lock cable through the spindle hole. With the lock cable threaded through the spindle hole, we can now install the dial ring. Perfect. With the dial ring now installed, we raise the spin dial release at the 12 o'clock position, and that exposes the mounting hole locations. Insert the first screw in the top mounting hole. Tighten this up and then back it off a quarter of a turn. Now, rotate the dial ring to expose the second mounting hole, the bottom mounting hole. Install the second screw. And again, we want to tighten this and then back it off about a quarter of a turn so that the dial ring is fairly loose. Good, we can move the dial ring around. That's important when we insert the spindle. Now, let's go ahead and lock this dial ring down at 0. This is an important step because if you don't lock it down at 0, it can affect the mechanical combination when you insert the spindle. So make sure you do this step first. Good. The next step is to install the lock body on the mounting plate. The first thing we want to do is position the lock cable so it doesn't interfere as we insert the clear plastic tube. So just tape that up out of the way. Now we can insert the clear plastic tube. Just insert it until it reaches the dial ring hub. You'll see that it protrudes beyond the mounting plate by about a quarter of an inch. On the back of the lock body, you'll see that there's a hole into which the clear plastic tube extends. Go ahead and install the lock body now. That clear plastic tube engages with the hole on the back of the lock body, and we're ready to install the screws. I'll hold it. Now insert the first mounting screw. Then you'll want to do the second mounting screw. And finally, the third mounting screw. All right, with those tight, we're now ready to insert the spindle through the back of the lock body and engage with the dial ring. So with the drilled and tapped end first, you insert that through the spindle hole. The spindle should now be flush with the back of the case. Okay. Now, from the front side, we want to install the screw into the end of the spindle through the dial ring hub. There's a slightly longer screw in your kit, so use that screw in order to insert and screw it into the spindle. That'll engage with the drilled and tapped end of the spindle. Okay, with that tight, we're going to go back to the inside of the lock side. The next step is to tighten down the 3 screws that are surrounding the spindle through the locator ports. Go ahead. Tightening down these 3 screws is very important. It engages the wheel pack with the spindle. Don't forget to do this step, otherwise you'll run into problems later on. Our installation is almost complete. The next step is to connect the lock cable to the lock body. Now we need to install the relocker plate. You do that by removing the 2 relocker screws. The next step is to install the relocker plate. With the relocker plate installed, now we can re-engage the relocker pin. The installation of the lock body is now complete. Now that the lock body and spindle are installed, we want to check the alignment of the dial ring and see if it turns smoothly. Raise the spin dial release. Now turn the spin dial by hand and see if it moves freely. If it moves freely, we're good, and we can tighten down the screws that hold the dial ring on. Perfect. Lock it down at 0 again. And we're ready to install the keypad. All right, now we can install the keypad portion on the dial ring. First, we want to install the battery. The battery compartment can be found on the back of the keypad. Inside the battery compartment, you'll see an embossed positive and negative terminal. You want to align these with the positive and negative of the battery. With the battery installed, we can now install the keypad on the dial ring. Perfect. Raise the spin dial release, rotate the dial to the 50 position in order to access the screw at the bottom of the keypad. We can use a screwdriver to tighten this down. This locks the keypad onto the dial ring. Now rotate the keypad back to the 0 position and lock it down again. Let's go ahead and test the codes. Referring to the programming guide, we can look at the coding key at the top right, and you can see that the Xtreme column shows a supercode of 111111, a user code of 123456, a mechanical combination of 505050, and a change code of 6 zeros. The bottom left portion of the programming guide shows the instructions to change user codes, to create a unique supercode, to open the lock, to delete a user, or to add a user. Now that the SafeLogic Xtreme is installed, let's go ahead and test the default codes. The first code is the supercode, 6 ones. Supercode is correct and the lock opens. The second code that's installed in the SafeLogic Xtreme is what we call the user code. The user code is 123456. Let's go ahead and enter that. And the lock opens. 2 beeps means it's the correct code, and the lock opens. The SafeLogic Xtreme also has a backlit keypad. You can turn the backlighting on either by pressing the light bulb button or any number on the face of the keypad. Good. Now let's test the mechanical combination. First, raise the spin dial release. With the spin dial release raised, you can see the dialing matrix. We're going to dial this combination like any mechanical combination lock. The default combination for the SafeLogic Xtreme is set at 50, 50, 50. That means in order to open it for the first time, you just have to dial it left 4 times to 50 and it'll open for you. 0 is at the 12 o'clock position. So now we can dial 4 times left to 50. So rotate 4 times completely to 50. Once, twice, 3 times, and on the 4th time we're going to stop at 50. Now we can rotate back to the right, and the lock opens. In order to lock the safe lock again, rotate the dial 4 times to the left. Stop at 0, re-engage the Spindle release. That's how you open the lock mechanically.